It was a chilly autumn morning in Montana, where the countryside stretched endlessly in hues of amber and green. Sarah Thompson's farm was quiet, save for the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional lowing of cattle. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and freshly tilled soil. Towering above the rest of the animals was Thunder, a majestic white Percheron horse with a reputation for his strength, grace, and intelligence. This morning, Thunder was behaving unusually. He stood near the edge of the paddock, his large hooves pawing at the ground and his ears flicking back and forth. His eyes, usually calm, were filled with urgency. Sarah, in her late 20s, with auburn hair tied back under a faded cowboy hat, noticed his restlessness while she was spreading feed. "What's got into you today, big guy?" she murmured, brushing her gloved hand down his neck. Thunder let out a sharp whinny, stepping back and forth as if urging her to follow. Sarah frowned, wiping her hands on her worn jeans. Thunder was not one to act skittish without reason. Sighing, she grabbed a lightweight jacket from the fence post and climbed over the paddock gate. "All right, boy, show me what's bothering you," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. Thunder led her across the pasture, his pace quick but deliberate. The frost-crisped grass crunched under Sarah's boots as they neared the edge of the farm, where the land sloped into a clearing bordered by dense woods. As they approached, Sarah's heart skipped. Thunder stopped abruptly and nudged his nose toward a small object on the ground. A cardboard box, battered and damp with morning dew. The box looked oddly out of place amidst the otherwise pristine clearing. "Is this what you wanted me to see?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her stomach tightened as she knelt to inspect the box. The faint sound of a whimper reached her ears, and Sarah froze. Slowly, she peeled back the flaps of the box. Inside, swaddled in a faded pink blanket, was a tiny girl, no older than 2. Her cherubic face was streaked with tears, her big brown eyes glistening as they locked onto Sarah's. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, her voice trembling. Who would leave you out here?" The baby let out a soft cry, her little hands clutching at the blanket. Sarah reached in carefully, her hands steady despite the whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. "You're okay now, sweetheart," she said softly, lifting the child into her arms. The girl was cold but alive, her small frame trembling against Sarah's chest. Thunder stood close, his eyes watching intently, as if ensuring the baby was safe. Sarah glanced around the clearing, searching for any sign of who might have abandoned the child. There was nothing but the rustling of trees and the faint chirp of distant birds. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, hugging the baby closer. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this child? Why was she left here, in the middle of nowhere? Sarah stood, her legs feeling shaky beneath her. "Come on, Thunder," she said firmly. "We need to get her inside." The walk back to the farmhouse was filled with silence, save for the occasional soft cries of the baby. Sarah's farmhouse, a modest but cozy structure with whitewashed walls and a wraparound porch, came into view. The sight of its warmth and safety brought her a small sense of relief. Once inside, Sarah set the baby on the couch and quickly fetched a soft towel to dry her off. The baby seemed to calm under Sarah's soothing touch, her cries fading into soft whimpers. "I don't know who you are, little one," Sarah murmured, brushing the girl's damp curls away from her forehead. "But you're safe now. We'll figure this out." As Sarah prepared a bottle of warm milk, her mind churned with possibilities. Someone had deliberately left the child there. But why? And who? Thunder's discovery had set something in motion. Something Sarah could feel deep in her gut. The answers would come. But for now, she focused on the immediate, keeping this tiny, vulnerable life safe. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting a golden glow over the fields. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows in the woods held secrets yet to be uncovered. The farmhouse hummed with quiet activity. Sarah paced the living room, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. The baby, now dressed in a soft yellow onesie Sarah had dug out from an old chest in the attic, was curled up on the couch, clutching a stuffed bear. "I found her in a box, Sheriff," Sarah said, her voice low but steady. "Right there in the clearing. Thunder wouldn't leave me alone until I followed him. Someone left her there, Tom." Tom Jenkins, the local sheriff, and Sarah's childhood friend, listened intently on the other end of the line. His voice was firm but tinged with concern. "Did you see anything else? Tracks? A car nearby?" "Nothing," Sarah replied, glancing out the window toward the clearing. The morning light was stronger now, illuminating every corner of the field, but no answers appeared. "It's like she just appeared there." Tom exhaled audibly. "All right, I'm heading over. Stay put until I get there." As Sarah hung up, she looked down at the baby, now sleeping peacefully. Her small chest rose and fell rhythmically, her innocence a stark contrast to the circumstances of her discovery. Sarah crouched beside her, brushing a lock of curly brown hair away from her forehead. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, little one?" Sarah whispered. The baby stirred but didn't wake. The sound of hooves crunching on gravel drew Sarah's attention. She stepped out onto the porch, where Thunder stood by the fence, his gaze fixed on the woods. His restless energy from earlier hadn't dissipated. "What is it now, big guy?" she called out, but Thunder didn't move. His ears were pricked forward, his stance rigid. Before Sarah could step off the porch, the rumble of an engine approached. Tom's patrol truck pulled into the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. He stepped out, adjusting his hat as he took in the scene. "Morning," he said, his voice gruff but familiar. "Morning," Sarah replied, motioning for him to follow her inside. Tom was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent in service to the small Montana community. He was the kind of man who carried the weight of his badge with quiet dignity. Inside, Tom's eyes immediately landed on the baby. His expression softened as he crouched down to get a closer look. "She's tiny," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Sarah nodded. "She can't be more than 2. I don't understand how anyone could leave her out there." Tom stood, his expression hardening. "It's not right. Whoever did this needs to be found. We'll start with a search of the area. Maybe there's something we missed." As if on cue, Thunder's agitated neigh echoed from outside. Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance before stepping onto the porch. "What's up with him?" Tom asked, squinting toward the field. "He's been acting like this all morning," Sarah said. "It's how I found her in the first place. He wouldn't leave me alone until I followed him." Tom walked toward the paddock, studying Thunder closely. The horse snorted, stamping a hoof. "Animals have instincts we can't explain," Tom said. "Maybe he knows something we don't." Sarah crossed her arms, her brow furrowed. "If only he could talk." Tom chuckled dryly but quickly sobered. "I'll head to the clearing first. You stay here with the baby. If anything feels off, call me immediately." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful." Tom tipped his hat and strode toward the woods, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. Sarah watched until he disappeared into the trees, the weight of the morning pressing heavily on her chest. Back inside, Sarah sat beside the baby, who had begun to stir. The little girl opened her eyes, blinking up at Sarah with a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Hi there, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, offering a warm smile. The baby's lip quivered, and tears welled up in her eyes. Sarah gently picked her up, rocking her in her arms. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're safe now. I promise." As the baby's cries quieted, Sarah felt a deep resolve settle over her. Whoever this child was, whatever her story might be, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let her face another moment of fear alone. Outside, Thunder paced near the fence, his watchful eyes fixed on the woods as if waiting for something. Or someone. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows over the farm as Sarah tried to keep herself busy. She brewed a pot of coffee and rummaged through her pantry for anything the baby might eat. Her mind, however, couldn't quiet. Every sound from outside made her pause. Every creak in the floorboards made her turn her head. The baby sat in an old wooden high chair that Sarah had cleaned up from her attic. She fiddled with a soft piece of bread that Sarah had placed in front of her, her tiny hands unsure of what to do. Occasionally, her big brown eyes darted toward Sarah, watching her every move. "You've been through something terrible, haven't you?" Sarah said softly as she sliced apples into tiny pieces. "But we're going to figure this out. I promise." A soft knock on the door startled her. She froze for a moment, her mind racing. Could it be Tom already? Or someone else? Peering through the curtain, she exhaled in relief. It was Tom, his expression grim. She opened the door, letting him step inside. "Well?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms, trying to brace herself for his response. Tom took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, his face lined with frustration. There wasn't much to find. No tracks, no personal belongings, just the box. He glanced toward the baby, who now clung to the edge of the high chair, staring at him with wide eyes. "She's the only clue we have for now." Sarah felt a pang of disappointment but nodded. "What do we do then? She can't stay out here with me forever." Tom's gaze softened. "For now, we contact Child Protective Services. They'll find a place for her." "No," Sarah said abruptly, surprising herself as much as Tom. Her voice was steady, her resolve firm. "Not yet. Look at her, Tom. She's terrified. She needs stability, not to be shuffled around." Tom sighed, his hand resting on the back of a chair. "Sarah, this isn't easy. You're not trained to handle this kind of situation." "Maybe not," Sarah replied, lifting the baby into her arms. The little girl snuggled against her shoulder, her small fingers gripping Sarah's shirt. "But I can give her what she needs right now. Safety, warmth, and someone who cares." Tom hesitated, the weight of the decision clear on his face. He finally nodded. "All right, but just for now. I'll handle the paperwork to buy you some time." "But Sarah..." "I know," she interrupted. "This isn't permanent. But for now, it's the right thing to do." Tom gave her a long look before grabbing his hat. "I'll come back tomorrow to check in, and if anything changes, you call me immediately." "I will," Sarah said. As Tom left, Sarah felt a mix of relief and trepidation. The responsibility of caring for this child was enormous, but the thought of letting her go to strangers felt wrong. She spent the rest of the day tending to the baby's needs, trying to make her as comfortable as possible. The little girl seemed to relax under Sarah's care, her cries fewer and her smiles more frequent. Sarah gave her a bath, dressed her in one of the old baby outfits she had found in storage, and read to her from a children's book she'd kept for sentimental reasons. By nightfall, the baby was asleep in a makeshift crib Sarah had set up beside her bed. Sarah sat nearby, the day's events replaying in her mind. Who had left the baby in the clearing? And why? She glanced out the window at the woods beyond the farm, their dark silhouettes unnervingly still. Thunder's restless behavior, the mystery of the abandoned child, and Tom's fruitless search left her with an uneasy feeling. "I'll protect you," she whispered to the sleeping baby, her voice filled with quiet determination. "No matter what it takes." Outside, Thunder stood under the moonlight, his ears twitching at every sound. The farm was quiet, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. The next morning came slowly, the first rays of sunlight struggling to break through a thick layer of fog that hung over the countryside. Sarah hadn't slept much, her mind restless with questions. The baby, however, had slept soundly, her tiny form rising and falling with peaceful breaths. As Sarah prepared breakfast, she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Peering through the kitchen window, she saw Tom's patrol truck pulling into the driveway. He stepped out, a notebook in hand, his face etched with the weight of an investigation that had only begun. Sarah opened the door before he had a chance to knock. "Good morning," she greeted him, motioning for him to come in. "Morning," Tom replied, tipping his hat as he entered. His eyes immediately found the baby, who was sitting in her high chair with a piece of toast clutched in her tiny hands. She looked up at him curiously, her big brown eyes unblinking. "Looks like she's adjusting," Tom said, his voice softening. "She's resilient," Sarah replied, setting a cup of coffee on the table for him. "But we can't pretend this isn't weighing on her. She's too young to understand, but you can see it in her eyes. She knows something's wrong." Tom nodded, taking a sip of coffee before opening his notebook. "I've started the process with CPS, like we discussed. They'll likely visit tomorrow to assess the situation." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Tomorrow? That soon?" "It's standard procedure," Tom said, his tone gentle but firm. "We need to make sure she's placed somewhere safe if her family can't be found." Sarah leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "I understand, but I wish there was more time." Tom hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Sarah, there's something else. I went back to the clearing early this morning. Still no signs of anyone who might have left her there, but I did find this." He slid a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside was a small torn scrap of paper, the edges frayed as if it had been exposed to the elements for days. On it, written in shaky, uneven handwriting, were the words, "Take care of her. I can't." Sarah's breath caught. "That's it? No name, no explanation." Tom shook his head. "That's all we've got. Whoever left her didn't want to be found." Sarah stared at the note, her mind racing. The words were desperate, almost pleading, and they added another layer to the mystery. "Do you think the mother wrote this?" Sarah asked. "Possibly," Tom said. "Or someone else close to her. Either way, it doesn't explain why she was left there, alone, in the cold." Sarah glanced at the baby, who was now babbling softly to herself, seemingly unaware of the gravity of the situation. "She deserves better than this." Tom nodded, his expression grave. "She does. That's why we need to keep digging. I've already put out a notice to nearby towns and hospitals, asking if anyone reported a missing child or saw anything suspicious. So far, nothing." The weight of the situation pressed heavily on Sarah. She was grateful for Tom's help, but the lack of answers was frustrating. "Can I keep the note?" Sarah asked. Tom hesitated, then nodded. "Just for now. But Sarah, don't get too attached to this situation. You're doing great with her, but once CPS steps in—" "I know," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "But until then, she's staying here with me." Tom studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, but if anything feels off, you call me immediately. And I mean it, Sarah. This situation could get complicated fast." "Understood," she replied. As Tom prepared to leave, he crouched down beside the baby. She stared at him with wide eyes, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of the high chair. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, a faint smile crossing his face. "You've got a good protector here in Sarah. You're in good hands." The baby tilted her head, as if trying to understand his words. After Tom left, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, the note resting in front of her. She traced the words with her fingertips, trying to imagine the person who had written them. The desperation in the handwriting was undeniable, but so was the care. Whoever had left this baby behind had cared enough to ensure she was found. But why not stay? Why not explain? The baby let out a soft coo, breaking Sarah's train of thought. She looked up to see the little girl watching her, a faint smile on her tiny lips. Sarah smiled back, her heart aching with a mix of love and uncertainty. "We'll figure this out, sweetheart," she said. "One way or another, we'll figure this out." Outside, Thunder stood near the fence, his ears twitching as he gazed toward the woods. The farm felt quiet, but Sarah couldn't shake the sense that the quiet held more questions than answers. The day passed in a haze of uncertainty. Sarah busied herself with farm chores, checking on the animals and tidying the farmhouse. The baby, whom Sarah had begun to call Little One, toddled around under her watchful eye, her curiosity about the world around her growing with each passing hour. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Thunder started his restless pacing again. From the porch, Sarah could see him circling near the fence, his large frame silhouetted against the fading light. "What is it this time?" she murmured, grabbing her jacket as she stepped outside. Thunder let out a sharp, urgent whinny and stomped his hoof. His head turned toward the woods, ears pricked forward. Sarah frowned. "Not again," she muttered. As she approached, Thunder began walking, pausing only to glance back at her as if urging her to follow. Sarah hesitated. The woods beyond her farm weren't vast, but they were dense, their dark canopy of trees casting eerie shadows even in daylight. She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed Tom's number. "Tom, it's Sarah," she said when he answered. "Thunder's acting up again. He's heading toward the woods." "Stay put," Tom replied immediately. "I'm close by. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Sarah hung up but didn't stop walking. Thunder moved ahead, his massive frame weaving through the underbrush with surprising grace. "All right, big guy, slow down," she called, her voice trembling slightly. The deeper they went, the quieter the woods became. The chirping of birds and rustling of leaves faded, leaving only the sound of her boots crunching on the forest floor and Thunder's steady steps. Then she saw it. A second cardboard box, half hidden beneath a tangle of overgrown ferns. Her stomach dropped. "Thunder," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The horse stopped a few feet away, his eyes fixed on the box. Sarah approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. The box was similar to the first, worn and damp, as if it had been left there for days. But this one was empty. She crouched down, examining it closely. Strange scratches marred the cardboard surface, deep and uneven, as if made by sharp claws. Dark stains dotted the inside, the sight of which made her stomach churn. "What the hell?" she muttered, pulling back her hand. A twig snapped behind her, and she spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. "It's just me," Tom's voice called out. Relief flooded through her as she saw his familiar figure emerging from the trees, flashlight in hand. "You scared me," Sarah said, standing quickly. Tom's eyes went to the box. He knelt beside it, his brow furrowing as he examined the strange markings and stains. "This doesn't look good," he said grimly. "What could have made those scratches?" Sarah asked, crossing her arms tightly. Tom shook his head. "I don't know. Could be an animal, but..." He trailed off, his gaze scanning the surrounding woods. "What?" Sarah pressed. "Something feels off," he admitted. "The placement, the condition of the box. It doesn't make sense." Thunder let out a low huff, pawing the ground impatiently. Tom stood, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "We need to go back. It's not safe out here after dark." Sarah nodded, glancing around nervously. As they turned to leave, a faint rustling sound came from deeper in the woods. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice taut. Tom froze, his flashlight beam darting toward the noise. The rustling grew louder, and then a figure emerged. A boy, no older than 8 or 9, his hair matted and his clothes torn. His eyes were wild, darting between them like a cornered animal. "Hey, hey," Tom said, lowering his voice as he held up a calming hand. "It's okay, son. We're not going to hurt you." The boy didn't respond. He took a step back, his bare feet crunching on the leaves, ready to bolt. Sarah's heart broke at the sight of him. "Wait," she called gently. "We just want to help. Are you hurt?" The boy stared at her, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the woods. "Damn it," Tom muttered, starting after him. "Tom, wait," Sarah called, grabbing his arm. "You'll never catch him in the dark." Tom stopped, clearly torn. He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "All right, We'll come back in the morning with more people." Sarah nodded, though her chest ached with worry. Who was that boy? And what was he doing out here, alone in the woods? As they made their way back to the farm, Sarah couldn't shake the image of his wide, fearful eyes. The mystery surrounding the baby had just grown deeper and far more unsettling. The morning came too quickly, bringing a crispness to the Montana air that carried a subtle urgency. Sarah barely slept, her thoughts consumed by the boy they'd seen in the woods. The baby, little one, had slept peacefully in the crib beside her bed, oblivious to the mysteries that loomed just beyond the safety of the farmhouse. By sunrise, Tom was back, this time with 2 other deputies, all armed with searchlights, maps, and a determination to find answers. Thunder stood near the fence again, his behavior calmer but still watchful, as though he sensed the gravity of the situation. "You sure you're up for this?" Tom asked Sarah as she pulled on her jacket. "I'm coming," she said firmly. "That boy was terrified. He needs help." Tom gave her a measured look but didn't argue. "All right, but stay close, and if anything feels wrong, you head back to the farm immediately." Sarah nodded, gripping a flashlight tightly in her hand. The group set out toward the woods, their boots crunching over the frost-covered ground. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper into the forest. The trees, tall and densely packed, filtered the sunlight into thin, fragmented beams. It was eerily quiet, the usual chatter of birds and rustling leaves replaced by an oppressive stillness. "Spread out, but not too far," Tom instructed, his voice low. "Keep an eye out for anything unusual." Sarah's heart raced as she scanned the area, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. Memories of the boy's wild eyes and ragged appearance replayed in her mind. She couldn't help but wonder how long he'd been out here, or why. "Over here," one of the deputies called. Breaking the silence, everyone hurried toward the voice, finding the deputy crouched near a small clearing. In the center of it was a crude shelter made of sticks and leaves, barely large enough for a child to crawl inside. Sarah's stomach tightened. "Is this where he's been living?" "Looks like it," Tom said, crouching to examine the structure. "But there's no sign of him now." The deputy pointed to the ground. Footprints, small, like a child's, leading further into the woods. Tom straightened, his jaw tightening. "All right, let's follow them. Stay alert." The group moved cautiously, following the faint trail of footprints through the underbrush. Sarah's nerves were on edge, each snap of a twig making her jump. Finally, they reached another clearing, and there he was. The boy, crouched near a small stream, his hands cupped to gather water. "Hey there," Tom called gently, stepping forward with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We're not here to hurt you. We just want to help." The boy whipped around, his eyes wide with fear. He scrambled backward, his movements frantic and animalistic. "Please, wait," Sarah called, stepping past Tom. Her voice was softer, filled with the compassion she hoped would reach him. "You're safe now. We can help you." The boy froze, his chest heaving as he stared at her. His matted hair hung over his face, and his clothes, little more than rags, clung to his thin frame. "Are you hungry?" Sarah asked, pulling a granola bar from her pocket and holding it out to him. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, cautiously, he crept forward, his eyes darting between Sarah and the others. He snatched the granola bar from her hand and retreated a few steps, tearing into it with desperate hunger. Sarah's heart ached at the sight. "It's okay," she said softly. "No one's going to hurt you." Tom took a slow step forward. "Son, can you tell us your name? Or how you got out here?" The boy's eyes narrowed, and he shook his head violently. "Do you know the baby?" Sarah asked gently, taking a chance. "The little girl we found in the box?" At the mention of the baby, the boy's expression shifted. His wild demeanor faltered, replaced by something that looked like recognition, or even guilt. You do know her, don't you? Sarah pressed, her voice steady but soft. The boy took another step back, his body trembling. Then, without warning, he bolted into the woods. "Damn it!" Tom shouted, starting after him. "No, wait!" Sarah called, but it was too late. Tom and one of the deputies had already taken off in pursuit. The remaining deputy stayed behind with Sarah, his face tense. "We'll find him. He can't have gone far." Sarah stared into the trees, her chest tightening. The boy's reaction to the mention of the baby was unmistakable. He knew her, and that meant the mystery was even deeper than they'd thought. Tom returned to the farmhouse hours later, his frustration palpable. The boy had vanished into the dense woods, leaving only the crude shelter and the faint trail of footprints behind. The deputies had scoured the area but found no further trace of him. Sarah stood on the porch, cradling the baby as Tom approached. The sinking sun cast a golden glow over the fields, but the weight of the day's events hung heavy between them. "Nothing?" she asked, her voice edged with disappointment. Tom shook his head, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "He's fast, and he knows those woods better than we do. It's like he disappeared." Sarah glanced at the baby, who was now chewing on her tiny fingers, blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding her. "He knows her, Tom. You saw the way he reacted when I mentioned her." "I did," Tom admitted, leaning against the porch railing. "But that just raises more questions. If he knows her, how is he connected? And why was she left in the clearing while he's been living out there alone?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Do you think they're siblings? Maybe he's her brother, and whoever left her thought they couldn't take care of both." Tom sighed, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It's possible, but we're working with guesses here. We need real answers. Where do we even start?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with frustration. "The boxes, the boy, this baby. It's all connected, but how do we untangle it?" Tom straightened, his expression resolute. "We start by broadening the investigation. I've already put out an alert to surrounding counties about the boy and the baby. Someone has to recognize them. In the meantime, I'll push for fingerprints on the boxes and check the handwriting on the note we found. Maybe something will come up." Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. "And what about the boy? He's just out there, alone. What if something happens to him?" "We'll keep searching," Tom assured her. "But he doesn't want to be found. Until he's ready to come out, we can only do so much." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden cry from the baby. Sarah rocked her gently, murmuring soothing words until the cries turned to soft whimpers. Tom watched, his expression softening. "You're good with her, you know. She deserves that much," Sarah said, meeting his gaze. "Whoever left her out there may have given up on her, but I won't." Tom nodded, his respect for Sarah evident. "Just be careful, Sarah. The more you get attached, the harder this is going to be when CPS steps in." "I know," she replied, though her heart ached at the thought. That evening, as the baby slept in the makeshift crib beside her bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a notebook spread in front of her. She had started listing every clue they had. The 2 boxes, the note, the boy's appearance, the baby's pink dress. Her thoughts were interrupted by a low nicker from outside. Sarah stood and looked out the window. Thunder was pacing near the edge of the paddock again, his massive form barely visible in the dim light of the rising moon. "What now?" she murmured, grabbing her jacket and heading out. Thunder stopped as she approached, his ears flicking toward the woods. Sarah followed his gaze but saw nothing. "Are you trying to tell me something?" she asked, her voice soft. Thunder snorted, his breath clouding in the cold night air. Sarah lingered for a moment before heading back inside. She didn't know why, but something about Thunder's behavior made her uneasy. It was as if he sensed things she couldn't, his instincts far sharper than hers. Back inside, she double-checked the locks on the doors and windows before settling into bed. Her sleep was restless, her dreams filled with images of the boy's wide, fearful eyes and the baby's fragile cries. By morning, she knew one thing for certain: the truth wouldn't stay hidden forever. And when it came to light, she had to be ready. For herself, for the boy, and most of all, for the baby. The sun rose hesitantly, as if uncertain it wanted to shed light on the tangled mysteries surrounding Sarah's farm. She was up early, cradling the baby as she moved about the kitchen, trying to push back the unease that had settled over her. She hadn't seen thunder at the paddock that morning, a rare occurrence that only deepened her sense of foreboding. A knock at the door startled her, and she carefully placed the baby in the high chair before heading to answer it. Tom stood on the porch, his expression a mix of weariness and determination. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman in a sharp navy suit, her demeanor professional and unreadable. "Sarah," Tom greeted, his tone gentle. "This is Beth Collins from Child Protective Services." Sarah's stomach dropped. She had known this moment would come, but facing it was another matter entirely. "Good morning," Beth said, her voice polite but firm. "I'm here to assess the child's situation and discuss next steps." Sarah nodded stiffly and stepped aside to let them in. The baby looked up as they entered, her big brown eyes locking onto Tom before darting to Beth. Her small hands clutched a piece of toast, and she shifted uncomfortably in her high chair. "She's beautiful," Beth said with a small smile, though her tone remained professional. "Thank you," Sarah replied, her voice quieter than she intended. Beth set her briefcase on the table and pulled out a notepad. "Ms. Thompson, I understand you've been caring for the child since you found her. Can you walk me through how she's been doing?" "She's doing well," Sarah said, her voice growing steadier. "She's eating, sleeping, and getting more comfortable here." She was scared at first, but now… She glanced at the baby, who had begun to babble softly to herself. "She's adjusting." Beth nodded, jotting notes. "That's good to hear, and I appreciate everything you've done for her. But as you know, this arrangement is temporary. Our goal is to find a more permanent solution." Sarah felt a pang in her chest. What does that mean exactly? Beth folded her hands on the table. If we can't locate her biological family, the next step would be placing her in foster care. We have families who are experienced in caring for children in situations like this. "No," Sarah said before she could stop herself. Beth looked up, her expression calm but firm. "Ms. Thompson, I understand this is difficult, but she's already been through so much," Sarah interrupted, her voice shaking. "She's just starting to feel safe here. How can uprooting her again be good for her?" Tom shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between his duty and his loyalty to Sarah. Beth's tone softened slightly. "I understand your concern, but foster care is designed to provide a stable environment. And while I don't doubt your intentions, the process has to move forward." "What if she stayed here?" Sarah asked, her voice steadying. Beth hesitated. "Are you suggesting that you'd like to foster her yourself?" "Yes," Sarah said firmly, surprising even herself. "At least until we know more. I can give her a safe home." Beth studied her for a long moment. "Ms. Thompson, becoming a foster parent requires an application, background checks, home inspections. It's not a quick process. And even then, there's no guarantee you'd be approved, especially given the circumstances." "Then tell me what I need to do," Sarah replied, determination blazing in her eyes. "I'll start the process today." Beth leaned back, considering her. "I'll need to discuss this with my supervisor. In the meantime, we'll hold off on moving her, but I can't make any promises." "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice resolute. Beth nodded and stood, closing her briefcase. "I'll be in touch soon. Please make sure you're prepared for a home visit. We'll need to assess the environment to ensure it's suitable." As Beth left, Tom lingered by the door, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You sure about this, Sarah?" he asked. "This isn't going to be easy." "Nothing about this has been easy," Sarah said, glancing at the baby, who had begun to drift off to sleep in her high chair. "But I can't just hand her over and hope for the best. She deserves more than that." Tom nodded slowly. "All right. I'll back you up however I can. Just be ready. This process can get messy." "I'll be ready," Sarah said, her voice firm. As Tom left, Sarah felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with bureaucracy and uncertainty. But looking at the baby's peaceful face, she knew one thing for sure. She was willing to fight for her. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the farm. But the shadows of the woods remained, a reminder that the mystery of the baby and the boy was far from over. The evening settled in slowly, the Montana sky painted in hues of pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sarah sat on the porch, the baby asleep in her arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with soft, rhythmic breaths. Thunder, however, was anything but at ease. The massive Percheron paced near the paddock, his head tossing every few moments, his movements agitated. He had been like this for hours, ever since the CPS worker had left earlier in the day. "What's gotten into you, boy?" Sarah murmured, her voice barely louder than the soft rustle of the evening breeze. Thunder let out a sharp whinny, stamping his hoof as he stared toward the woods. Sarah followed his gaze, her stomach tightening. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their dark silhouettes outlined against the fading light. A deep unease crept over her. Thunder's instincts had already led her to the baby and the second box. Was he sensing something again? "I'll be right back," she whispered, carrying the baby inside and placing her gently in the makeshift crib. She grabbed her flashlight and jacket, hesitating at the door before stepping out into the growing darkness. Thunder was waiting near the fence, his large eyes meeting hers. He stomped the ground again, as if urging her to hurry. All right," Sarah muttered, climbing over the fence to stand beside him. "Lead the way." The horse turned and began walking toward the woods, his movements deliberate. Sarah followed closely, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. The woods were eerily quiet, the usual nighttime symphony of crickets and rustling leaves conspicuously absent. Sarah's pulse quickened as they moved deeper into the trees, the beam of her flashlight bouncing off the trunks and casting long, flickering shadows. "Thunder, if this is nothing, you owe me an easy day tomorrow," she joked nervously, her voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, Thunder stopped. His ears twitched, and he let out a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What is it?" she asked, swinging her flashlight ahead. The beam landed on a strange sight. A small clearing, eerily similar to the one where she'd found the baby. At its center was another cardboard box. This one almost entirely collapsed under the weight of time and weather. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached cautiously. The box was empty, but like the others, it bore the same deep scratches and faint stains. "This can't be a coincidence," she muttered, crouching to examine it more closely. A sudden sound, a faint rustling, came from behind her. Sarah froze, her grip tightening on the flashlight. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was the boy, his wide, wild eyes reflecting the beam of her flashlight. "You," Sarah breathed, her heart racing. The boy didn't move. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his thin frame trembling as he stood at the edge of the clearing. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, taking a cautious step toward him. "I just want to help." The boy flinched, his eyes darting toward the woods as though considering another escape. "Wait," Sarah said quickly, dropping to her knees to appear less threatening. "I know you're scared, but I can help you. You don't have to run." The boy's gaze flickered back to her, his expression torn between fear and desperation. "Do you know the baby?" Sarah asked gently. "Is she your sister?" The boy's lip quivered, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might answer, but then he bolted, disappearing into the woods before she could say another word. "Wait!" she called, scrambling to her feet. Thunder let out an agitated snort, pawing the ground as if to say, "Let him go." Sarah stood frozen, her heart aching. The boy's reaction had been different this time. There was recognition in his eyes, a flicker of connection when she mentioned the baby. "Why won't you let me help you?" she whispered into the empty woods. Thunder nudged her shoulder gently, pulling her from her thoughts. She sighed, patting his neck. "All right, let's head back. I don't want to leave her alone too long." As they made their way back to the farm, Sarah's mind raced. The boy knew the baby. Of that she was certain. And his presence near the box couldn't be a coincidence. Whatever connected them, she knew she was running out of time to figure it out. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah checked on the baby, who was still sound asleep. She lingered by the crib, watching her peaceful face. "We'll figure this out," she whispered, her voice trembling with determination. "No matter what it takes." Outside, Thunder stood near the paddock, his eyes fixed on the woods. The night was quiet, but the unease lingered, thick as the Montana fog. The next morning brought a rare stillness to the farm. The sun rose over the rolling hills, illuminating the frost-kissed fields and the farmhouse that had become the epicenter of so many questions. Sarah stood on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand, her eyes fixed on the woods. The events of the night before weighed heavily on her. The boy's fleeting appearance and the discovery of the third box had deepened the mystery, but it had also ignited something in her, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Inside, the baby was awake, her cheerful babbles filling the small farmhouse. Sarah stepped back inside and scooped her up, her heart swelling at the sight of the child's bright, trusting eyes. "Good morning, little one," she said, kissing her on the forehead. "Ready for some breakfast?" As Sarah prepared a bottle, her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up and saw Tom's name on the screen. "Morning, Tom," she said, balancing the baby on her hip. "Morning," Tom replied, his voice tired. "I've got some news. Not much, but it's something. Can I come by?" "Of course," Sarah said, her pulse quickening. "I'll be here." Within half an hour, Tom's patrol truck pulled into the driveway. He stepped out with a folder in hand, his face etched with both determination and exhaustion. "Tell me you've got something," Sarah said as he stepped onto the porch. "I do, but it's not much," Tom admitted, opening the folder. "We ran the handwriting on the note through the database. No matches. Same for the fingerprints on the boxes. Whoever left the baby and those boxes knew what they were doing. They've left almost no trail." Sarah sighed, her frustration mounting. "And the boy?" Tom shook his head. "Nothing on him either. No missing person reports matching his description. No recent hospital visits. It's like he doesn't exist." "That's impossible," Sarah said, her voice rising. "He's a child, Tom. Someone has to know who he is." "I know," Tom said gently. "And we'll keep looking. But Sarah, you've got to prepare yourself. This could take weeks, months, maybe longer." Sarah looked down at the baby, who was happily gnawing on a teething ring. "She doesn't have that kind of time, Tom. She needs stability now." Tom studied her for a long moment. "Have you thought more about what we talked about? Fostering her? Officially?" "I've thought about it every second since Beth left," Sarah admitted. "And I'm willing to do whatever it takes. But I can't just stop there. That boy, he's out there, alone, scared. They're connected. I know they are." Tom nodded slowly. "All right, let's focus on what we can do today. I'll help you start the paperwork for fostering her, and I'll keep pushing the search for the boy. We'll figure this out together." For the first time in days, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. That evening, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the baby asleep in the crib beside her. Papers were spread out before her. Applications, background check forms, and a list of requirements for becoming a foster parent. The process was daunting, but as she filled out each form, she felt a growing sense of resolve. She looked over at the baby, her heart swelling with a mix of love and determination. "You're not just a mystery to solve," she whispered. "You're my reason to fight." Her thoughts drifted to the boy in the woods, his wild eyes filled with fear. She didn't know his story, but she knew she couldn't give up on him either. The farm, once a quiet place of solitude, had become a beacon, a place of safety and second chances. By the time Sarah finished the last form, the moon was high in the sky, casting its pale light over the fields. Outside, Thunder stood near the paddock, his eyes fixed on the woods. Sarah stepped onto the porch, pulling her jacket tight against the cold. She stood beside Thunder, her hand resting on his strong neck. "We'll bring him home," she said softly, as if the horse could understand her. Both of them. Thunder let out a low nicker, his head nodding slightly. As Sarah looked out at the dark woods, she felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was one she was ready to walk. For the baby, for the boy, and for the chance to give them the family they deserved. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and watch this next story, which is incredibly moving.